طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وإمامنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أما بعد. All praises for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has gathered us and brought us together here in Toronto, Ontario. The requested topic of the sitting and of the discussion was some of your struggles, some of your sacrifices, ups and downs with regards to seeking knowledge. Could you tell us more about the Hadith culture, disciplism, what type of tea do you drink, and why? Different things like this. Alhamdulillah, there are many people that are bigger, better than me, weren't further, more talent, more skill, harder working, who spoke about their lives and their ups and their downs and their sacrifices. That's first and foremost, so inshallah you can definitely go back to them. Obviously, unfortunately, many people have asked me and continue to ask me about my life story and how'd you start and what was the motive, the driving factor, hadith disciple, etc. We've done many videos on that. Lakin, inshallah, la mani'. Hopefully there's nothing wrong with mentioning it again. Perhaps it will be a means of encouragement. Perhaps, bidnillahi ta'ala. The hadith culture, the different types of teas, teaism, the teist, hopefully we'll be able to speak on them as well. But before we go that far, bidnillahi ta'ala, I want to share a few things with you with regards to some of the akhlaq and some of the adab of a talib al-ilm in general, and some of the akhlaq and the adab of a disciple specifically, bidnillahi ta'ala. Not looking towards me, but the ideal of hadith disciple is supposed to be like the elite, as we explained before. The adab of talib al-ilm, the tulab al-ilm, they're supposed to be the elite Muslims. Last year it was in, Minneapolis. I gave a lecture the year before with regards to the akhlaq of a student of knowledge. And I told him that the akhlaq of a student of knowledge would be akhlaq of a Muslim. Sidq, being truthful, being brave, being courageous, being on time, keeping your word, being loyal, being faithful, being humble. These are all things that every Muslim is supposed to do. However, the talib al-ilm, his circle, his ring, her, is supposed to be what? Smaller and tighter, even more closely knit. He's supposed to be the truthful, the brave, much more than the average Muslim. And then among the talabat al-ilm, we have the students of hadith. And among the students of hadith, we have the hadith disciple. And the hadith disciple is supposed to be the best of the best. And that's why some of the Salaf al-Salih, some of the Tabi'een and their followers, they would say, "Man talaba hadith Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فينبغي أن يكون خير الناس لأنه طلب أعلى الأمور." Hamad ibn Salama and others, they would say, anyone who's seeking hadith, those who read hadith, study hadith, ينبغي أن يكون خير الناس. They should be the best of the people. يعني في الأخلاق والأداب، في المعاملة، في المحافظة على الصلاة، في المحافظة على الصيام، في المحافظة على الأسس والأركان. They say he's supposed to be the best of the best because لأنه طلب أعلى الأمور, he sought the highest of the high, the pinnacle, the summit of ilm, without a doubt, is the hadith of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. So that's first and foremost. The akhlaq, the adab of a talib al-ilm are no different than the adab and the akhlaq of a Muslim. The akhlaq of a student of hadith are no different than the akhlaq and the adab of a student of knowledge. The adab and the akhlaq of a hadith disciple, disciplism, and disciple culture is supposed to be no more than those of the tulab hadith. Walakin, how it's supposed to be what? Higher. It's supposed to be even more refined and detailed. Bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's in general, but there's a few specific things that I want to get into. Bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is the adab of al-hilm. Al-hilm. Something that many people have forgotten about. Many people are heedless. Some people just don't even know about it when it comes to al-hilm. And obviously al-hilm isn't a word that can be translated or rendered into English with, one term. Forbearance, patience, okay? Thick skin, tough skin, okay? Being, one could say, ahyanan, being diplomatic, all right? There are many different ways and different concepts of the concept of hilm in English. We know that al-hilm is from the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And al-halim is from the Asma al-Husna, the names that Allah called Himself and named Himself in the Quran al-Aziz, al-Hilm. As far as the concept of al-Hilm, then that is from the beginning of the end in the Kitab and in the Sunnah. As the Prophet ﷺ tells us, La ahad asbar min Allah. No one is more patient than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives them things. They say He has a son. They disrespect Him. They belie Him. Yu'dhin ibn Adam, the son of Adam, annoys me. And the list goes on of the nusus, the text regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hilm. So if Allah has this sifa, and He has this name, this action, then obviously, as you all know, the people of knowledge, they say, there are some of the Asma al-Husna that the slave should emulate. And the slave, the servant, man or woman, should take an example from those names, from those attributes. Not all, but some of them, such as knowledge, such as al-Jamal, beauty, such as strength. Allah is strong, and He loves the strong, and the people should be strong. And there are other attributes of Allah that are only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At-ta'al, okay? Allah Azza wa Mutakabbir. The slave is not supposed to be what? Mutakabbir. Alright? Of conceit, arrogance, pride, and these different things. With exceptions to the few times in which it's permissible to have those characteristics. Like in the time of battle. Or maybe even in a debate sometime. When you have to put forth the haqq for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, many of the Asma al-Husnas, the people knowledge mentioned, the slave should what? He should try to practice these attributes. And from them is al-hilm, is being forbearant, being tolerant, being patient, putting up with harm, not losing your temper, not becoming angry too quick, and too hastily. Khairan, inshallah ta'ala. Sulaiman ibn Harb, who's from the muhaddithin of the past, he said, Zaynu hadha li'ilmi hilmu ahlihi. He says, Zaynu hadha li'ilm. He says the beauty of this knowledge. Okay, you have clothes, and then you have the thing that sticks out from your clothes, the tie in your suit, or the socks that you're wearing that stick out from the rest of the normal colors and the style of your clothes. The zayn, he said the crown jewel, the beauty, and the most beautiful thing of this beautiful knowledge, he says, hilmu ahlihi, is the forbearance of his people. This person has all of this knowledge, all of this ilm, all of that you studied, and then there's someone who doesn't know your worth, who disrespects you, who doesn't give you your full haqq. You don't become angry. You don't demand. You don't become bossy, irritated. You be patient. You have forbearance, and you allow your skin quote unquote to be thick. It's a very important khuluq of a hadith disciple, is to be forbearant. And if you're forbearant, and if you put up with the harm and the difficulties, know for sure it's going to be infectious and contagious. The people that are around you, they're going to learn. They're going to see, wow, he didn't get angry. He knows more than me, and he's quiet. She studied more than me, and she's not saying anything. So therefore, let me be quiet. Let me have more hilm, have more forbearance, more tolerance. This person is arguing, debating, talking, and speaking when they should be listening. Yet and still, a true master of knowledge is not going to lose his or her temper. They're going to be what? They're going to be forbearant. So that's first and foremost. Zaynu hadha al-ilm hilmu ahlihi. That's the most beautiful thing that a hadith disciple can have, is bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is to be forbearant upon the people that don't know and don't understand properly. Moving forward, another very important concept of hadith disciple is to find good in every situation. To find good in every situation. Suhaib radiallahu anhu, as you all know, he narrated that the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam said, Ajaban li amril mu'min. He says the believer's life is marvelous, wonderful, breathtaking. Why? What's so special about the believer's life? We see many believers that are starving, that are hungry, that are cold, that are naked, that are being killed and persecuted. We find many of these different things. So how is the believer's life so marvelous and so different from the non-believer's life? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "In asabatu sarra'u shakara fakana khayran lah." When good comes his way, when prosperity comes towards the believer, of wealth, of children, of knowledge, of food, of drink, comfort, safety, whatever the case may be, the person is thankful to Allah Azza wa Jal. It's not because I'm intelligent, because I'm smart, because I work hard, because I'm beautiful, because I'm handsome. It's only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let me thank Allah, the one who gave me this knowledge, who allowed me to pick up the book and read the book and travel and study. Let me thank Him and not look towards myself. And then he says, وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ ضَرَّاءُ صَبَرَ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. But if the opposite comes his way, you lose your children, وَلِيَذُ بِاللَّهِ, you lose your wealth, you have bad health, you lose a teacher, you lose a student, your library is burnt, something happens to you, you get married, you get divorced, you get separated, you don't get a chance to make it overseas, whatever happens that seems to be a means of adversity, sabara, he's patient. You don't cry out and complain, scratch their faces, rip their clothes, punch the wall, curse, swear, and growl. They don't do these things. They have forbearance. فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. So in actuality, it's really good for him or for her. And this, as Ibn Rajab rahimahullah and others of the ulama have explained, is the highest level of the slave's reaction and behavior with al-qada' wal-qadr. The divine decree, the predestiny of Allah Azza wa Jalla. We have different levels. The first level that every single believer must have is sabr, patience. And then we have a-rida, is to be pleased. And then we have a shukr, is for you to thank Allah for afflicting you. Thank Allah for testing you. Thank Allah for taking something away from you because perhaps it wasn't good for me. It was a distraction. It was making me feel that I had something special and I needed to be humbled. And the list goes on. Everybody clear on this? So Suhaib radiallahu anhu, he says that the believer's life, that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, is marvelous. And this is why it's marvelous. So therefore, this hadith teaches us this concept, which is a staple part of hadith disciple and a disciple culture, and that is to find good in every situation. The question is now, what does this pertain to hilm, forbearance? I want to read to you a very brief story, a very brief athar, which will bring both of these guiding principles together, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, in one line. And that is forbearance, and that is finding the best out of the worst. The best, finding good in bad, making good out of every single situation. Khairan, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's narrated here from Abu Uthman al-Warraq. He said, اجتمع أصحاب الحديث عند وكيع قال وعليه ثوب أبيض فانقلبت المحبرة على ثوبه فسكت مليا ثم قال ما أحسن السواد في البياض. He says, Abu Uthman al-Warraq, he narrated, he says, اجتمع أصحاب الحديث عند وكيع. Waki' ibn al-Jarrah al-Ru'asi, we know he's from the kibar al-muhaddithin of his time. Okay, from the great ulama of Kufa. And from the big major students of Sufyan al-Thawri. So Waki' rahimahullah, some of his students, they came, the Ashab al-Hadith, okay, the disciples of the past. And he was wearing a white garment. And we all know that it's the sunnah for men to wear white garments. فَانْقَلَبَتْ عَلَيْهِ الْمِحْبَرَةِ. And all of a sudden, there came a clumsy student, a clumsy disciple. We said a klutz, someone just fumbled and he knocked the ink over and spilled it on his clothes. فَسَكَتَ مَلِيًّا. So he kept silent for a little bit. Yani كَادَ أَنْ يَغْضَبْ. He was about to become angry. He's about to lose his temper. You fool. Can't you see? Why are you so clumsy? What most of us would do. Many of us would do or say things worse than that. So he kept silent for a little bit. And then he said, مَا أَحْسَنَ السَّوَادِ فِي الْبَيَاضِ. He says, look how beautiful and how handsome a black and white garment is. Whether it's polka dots, pinstripes, thick stripes. He says, how excellent is black on white. In other words, they ruined his garment. They ruined his garment. But instead of him becoming angry at the man who in most cases, they said, might have been a peasant, someone that was poor, someone that was clumsy, he says, now my garment, what? It looks nice. So just stop and think about this now. If you're wearing black and you walk to make wudu or you walk by and a sister spills bleach on you, what's the first thing you're going to do? And the bleach is all over your clothes now. You're going to become angry. You may say something, but the hilm, the forbearance, is for you to look at the bad situation and make it into a what? A good situation. Alhamdulillah, and then have a new style. Everybody understand the point that we're trying to get here? So this great muhaddith here, he didn't become angry at the man. He didn't become upset at the man. Rather, he was forbearant. He was tolerant upon the person who could have been poor, could have been weak. Okay, Allahu A'lam, who spilt it on him. And also, the concept of him turning a bad situation into a what? A good situation and a lesson for the tulab. And this is something that is paramount. I can't necessarily explain this in words. You may go do a lecture. You may go give a class. It may be somebody who wants to debate and argue with you that doesn't know a tenth of what you know, hasn't read any of the books that you read, And they're trying to come as a haggler, as we say, a heckler trying to show you up at your own show. So not to become angry, not to lose your temper, but to make what? Good out of the situation. Khairan, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another fact that I want to share with you, bidnai ta'ala, is from a very important book for a hadith disciple, and it is the book of Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, rahimahullah, called Al-Jami' li Akhlaq al-Rawi wa Adab al-Sami'. One of the most famous books on the detailed and finely tuned do's and don'ts of a student of hadith is called Al-Jami' li Akhlaq al-Rawi wa Adab al-Sami'. He wrote a compilation and a compendium of the ahadith, the athar, the qisas, stories, even some dreams, things like this, from the people of the past regarding what the rawi should do and what the sami' should do. He begins his book by saying, Alhamdulillahi dhil qudrati wal jalal, wal ni'ma sabiqati wal afdal, الذي من علينا بمعرفته وهدانا إلى الإقرار بربوبيته وجعلنا من أمة خير أو خاتم النبيين السامي بفضله على سائر العالمين الطاهر الأعراق الشريف الأخلاق. قال الله الكريم مخاطبا له في الذكر الحكيم وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم صلى الله عليه وأزلف منزلته يديه أو لديه وعلى إخوانه وأقربيه وصحابته الأخيار وتابعيه وسلم عليه وعليهم أجمعين دائما أبدا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد ذكرت في كتاب شرف أصحاب الحديث ما يحدو ذا الهمة على تتبع آثار رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والاجتهاد في طلبها والحرص على سماعها والاهتمام بجمعها والانتساب إليها. ولكل علم طريقة ينبغي لأهله أن يسلكوها وآلات يجب عليهم أن يأخذوا بها ويستعملونها. كذا يستعملونها على يعني لغة أخرى. وقد رأيت خلقا من أهل هذا الزمان ينتسبون إلى الحديث ويعدون أنفسهم من أهله المتخصصين بسماعه ونقله، وهم أبعد الناس مما يدعون وأقلهم معرفة بما إليه ينتسبون. يرى الواحد منهم إذا كتب عددا قليلا من الأجزاء واشتغل بالسماع برهة يسيرة من الدهر أنه صاحب حديث على الإطلاق، ولما يجهد نفسه ويتعبها في طلابه ولا لحقته مشقة الحفظ لصنوفه وأبوابه. He starts off his book obviously by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, declaring His oneness, thanking and acknowledging Him for His blessings and His bounties, sending prayers and salutations upon Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and mentioning His virtue, His bounty, His status, His followers, His family members, etc. And listen very carefully to these words, and pay close attention to the fact that he died in the 5th century, and we're many, many years after him. And listen to these words, and then reflect on yourself, and reflect on others. He says, فَقَدْ ذَكَرْتُ فِي كِتَابِ شَرَفِ أَصْحَابِ الْحَدِيثِ. He says, another book of mine's, شَرَفُ أَصْحَابِ الْحَدِيثِ, the nobility of the people of hadith. He says, I mention many things which will inspire those who wish to seek the hadith of the Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. I've mentioned these things, the virtues, the superior excellent merits of being a hadith disciple. He talked about that in a different book. He says, working hard and sacrificing to get these hadith, to listen to them, to hear them. He says to pay a close amount of attention. He says, وَالْإِنْتِسَابِ إِلَيْهَا. Listen carefully to that. He says, in attributing oneself to hadith. That's the whole concept of hadith disciple. Why hadith disciple? Attributing yourself not to this sheikh, not to these people, not to this group, not to this, but to the direct hadith of the Prophet. He says we finished all of that in our other book. We talked about all of those virtues. He says, وَلِكُلِّ عِلْمٍ طَرِيقَةٌ يَنْبَغِي لِأَهْلِهِ أَنْ يَسْلُكُوهَا. He says, and for each and every discipline, each and every field, each and every expertise, each and every way of life, there is a science. There is a method, a methodology, a school of thought. There's a set of principles and rules, do's and don'ts. There are parameters in every discipline, in every field. In Islam, outside of Islam. In Islam and outside of Islam. So the fuqaha, they have adab, they have dawabit, they have things that they stick to. We talk about the qurra. They have specific traditions and practices that they perform that only the qurra do, and it's well known. whether they're in agreement with the sunnah or totally against the sunnah. But it's well known, ijaza, this qira'at, this, that. They even ahkam fiqhiyah when it comes to sujood al-tilawa. They have certain etiquettes that the other people don't have. Sadaqallahu al-azim, saying that after the tilawa, that's something that not all but many, they stick to. And it's mandatory for you to say Sadaqallahu al-azim. That's not the case with the fuqaha, with the people of usul, the people of the Arabic language. There's adab, there's akhlaq, there's a there's an etiquette that they stick to. Every discipline in every field. He says that the people and the specialists and those who are who propagate this way, they stick to these set of parameters. He says, وَآلَاتٌ يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَنْ يَأْخُذُوا بِهَا. And there are alat, there are tools, there are steps, there are keys. There are specific tangible ways that will allow you to reach that goal and to become a person of that discipline. But he says, but you must take them. The keys are there. The tools are clearly laid on the table. But how many people are actually picking up screwdrivers, hammers, and wrenches? I want to be a hadith disciple. I want to study a hadith. I want to go overseas. I want to go to Saudi. I want to go to Yemen. I want to go to South Africa. I want to go. But how many things are right in front of us, beneath our noses, that we don't take? He then says, وَيَسْتَعْمِلُونَهَا. That's in the book. Perhaps it's another lughah. We know this is different, يعني أوجه in the Arabic language. Or maybe it's a mistake from the editor. Al-Muhim. Al-Mafruḍ يَسْتَعْمِلُوهَا عَلَى الْجَادَّةِ الْمَعْرُوفَةِ. He says, and they're to use these tools and these keys. Listen carefully now. He says, وَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ. He says, and there's a group of people that I've seen في هذا الزمان, in our times. He died 463. In our times. He says, يَنْتَسِبُونَ إِلَى الْحَدِيثِ. They attribute themselves to hadith. We're people of hadith. نحن أصحاب الحديث وأهل الحديث. Everybody understand this? He says, وَيَعُدُّونَ أَنفُسَهُم مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْمُتَخَصِّصِينَ بِالسَّمَاعِ وَنَقْلِهِ. And they consider themselves to be specialists, hadith masters. We know what we're talking about. This is authentic. This is da'if. You're upon guidance. You're not upon guidance. And the list goes on. They consider themselves mutakhasisin. They're specialists. وَهُمْ أَبْعَدُ النَّاسِ مِمَّا يَدَّعُونَ. And they are the furthest from the people regarding their claim. Hadith is in one valley and they're in another time zone, another hemisphere. They're on another part of the planet and hadith is in another part. أَبْعَدُ النَّاسِ. He says they don't have bu'd. They're far from. He says no, they're the furthest from the people from the claims that they make. وَأَقَلُّهُمْ مَعْرِفَةً بِمَا إِلَيْهِ يَنْتَسِبُونَ. And they have the least knowledge of that which they talk about. That which they say, that which they scream and claim, he says they have the least knowledge. يَرَى الْوَاحِدُ مِنْهُمْ. He says, for an example, one of them, or a few of them, they'll write a few hadiths, they'll study for a little bit, they write down a couple of books, they attend a couple of classes, they hear, بُرْهَةً يَسِيرَةً مِنَ الزَّمَنِ. He says, for a short period of time, and they consider themselves that they're absolute hadith professionals. They've reached the pinnacle, they've reached the top. There's no more need to study and to travel. وَلَمَّا يُجْهِدْ نَفْسَهُ. He says, and they haven't suffered. They haven't struggled. They haven't, وَلَا لَحِقَتْهُ. He says, they haven't tasted any of the bitter blood, sweat, and tears that it comes to be a true student of hadith. كما أخبرنا أبو حازم عمر بن أحمد بن إبراهيم العبدوي الحافظ إملاء بنيسابور قال أخبرنا أبو محمد عبد الله بن محمد بن زياد قال أخبرنا محمد بن إسحاق الثقفي قال حدثنا محمد بن سهل بن عسكر قال حضرت المأمون بالمصيصة فقام إليه رجل بيده محبرة فقال يا أمير المؤمنين صاحب حديث منقطع به قال فوقف المأمون فقال له إيش تحفظ في باب كذا وكذا قال فسكت الرجل فقال المأمون حدثنا ابن علية عن فلان عن فلان عن فلان وحدثنا حجاج الأعور عن ابن جريج كذا حتى عد فيه كذا حديثا ثم قال إيش تحفظ في باب كذا قال فسكت فسرد فيه كذا حديثا ثم قال أحدهم يطلب الحديث 3 أيام يقول أنا صاحب حديث أعطوه 3 دراهم. He says this horrible example that I'm making for you, this ugly image, this image of ugliness, somebody claiming, talking, professing that they're a person of hadith and they really actually haven't studied, haven't done anything, haven't put in the necessary work in the necessary time. He says it's similar to a narration that we have reported from Abu Hazim Umar ibn Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Abdawi, the great Hafiz. He says, Imla'an. He dictated to us this narration. In other words, he was sitting here, Abu Hazim, the Sheikh of al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, And the tulab were yaktubun, they were writing. He dictated to them this narration. And this narration was given to him in Nishapur. And this goes to show you diqqatul muhaddithin, how precise and how accurate they were, even though it's not a hadith of the Prophet, nor is it a athar of Umar or Ali. It's not a qada of Umar. This is just shay yurwa. But they have dubbed. They're precise in what they narrated and what they mention. So they were in the country of Nishapur. We obviously know that's the country of Imam Muslim. Okay? So he told us this narration in Latin in Nishapur. And he narrated from Abu Muhammad, Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ziyad, who reported from Muhammad ibn Ishaq al-Thaqafi, who reported from Muhammad ibn Sahal ibn Askar, who said, Hadartul Ma'mun. He says, I was with the Khalifa at the time, Ma'mun. Anybody who knows about the Islamic history, we know about the different leaders and the caliphs of Iraq and of the other sections of the Islamic world at that time. In a region called Misisa. Okay? So a man stood up and he was holding an ink pot, a bottle of ink, an inkwell. And he said, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, O leader, O Ma'mun, O Khalifa, O President, O King, Prime Minister or Premier, as they say. So he says, Sahibu hadithin munqati'un bihi. He says, I'm a hadith disciple, basically. Sahib hadith. I'm a hadith student and I'm poor. I'm a wayfarer. I'm stuck. I'm stranded. I'm lost in this city. I'm lost in this place. Help me out. Give me some money. Basically, he's asking for money from the leader. فَوَقَفَ الْمَأْمُونَ. So he stood up. He got up and he stood up. And he said, إِشْ تَحْفَظْ فِي بَابْ كَذَا وَكَذَا. He says, all right, no problem. I'll help you out. I'll give you some money. Cool. طيب, لا بأس. But what hadiths have you memorized regarding this issue and that issue? Regarding zakat, regarding talaq, regarding jihad, regarding mirath, inheritance. How much does the grandmother get? How much does the wife get if the husband has another wife? What hadith you memorize regarding these different issues? Okay, فَسَكَتَ الرَّجُلُ. So the man, obviously he was dumbfounded. He didn't have nothing to say, so he kept silent. So the leader, the Khalifa at that time, he himself reported from Ibn Ulayya, fulan. He started mentioning the hadith with his asanid, his narration. Now pay close attention now. Just think about now and then. This is the leader. This is not a scholar. This is the Khalifa. And he himself was what? He was built in knowledge. So he asked the man couldn't give him anything, so he himself gave the man a hadith with his isnad. He then asked him, Ish tahfad fi bab kada. He says, what else do you memorize regarding salah? Do you go down on your hands or your knees first? Do you raise your hands? Do you put them on your chest? What do you memorize, basically? The man kept silent. So Ma'mun, he did the same thing again. He then said, and this is they say al-qusha, this is the straw from the date palm tree that snaps the camel's back. As we say in English, they have the same overseas. He says, أَحَدُهُمْ يَطْلُبُ الْحَدِيث ثَلَاثَةَ أَيَّامٍ. He says, there's a person who reads hadiths, who studies hadiths for 3 days. And then he says, أَنَا صَاحِبُ hadith, I'm a hadith disciple, I'm a hadith student. And then he scorned the man, and he totally looked down upon him. He basically spat on him. He said, give him 3 dirhams. Like, get this guy out of here. Get out of my face. Yalla, ruh, sir, as they say. Somebody comes and asks for some money. Can you prove that you're needy? Yeah, and so here. Everybody understand this? He threw some change at him. He says, give him 3 dirhams and get lost. So the highlighting point from the story is what? Is that this was something over 1,000 years ago, a long time ago. There were people who claimed, who said things, who called themselves things, and they themselves actually didn't verify and actualize them being real, true students of hadith. So these are just some words of encouragement, some fa'idah. First and foremost, this is for myself. Before any of you sitting in front of me, this is for my own ears. Is that, are we really honestly seeking and studying? Do we really respect, love, knowledge? Do we have a passion for knowledge in general, let alone hadith? And what are we willing to do with regards to sacrificing for what we call the hadith culture? So, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, this